can be bold. Proverbs 28 and verse 1 says, "The wicked flees when no man pursueth, but the righteous are bold as a lion." In other words, a person who has a guilty heart has this guilt complex. And this person may feel that people are out to get him. So then they have the persecution complex. They have that paranoid mentality. Somebody's out to get me. And many times, nobody's out to get that individual, but that person's conscience, because of something that he or she has done in the past, and they didn't get it right. That's why they feel this persecution, this guilt that's upon them, which then prevents them from being bold as a lion. And so we want to be like those who walk around with a clear conscience. So if we wrong somebody, we go to that person, make it right, so that we can be clear in our conscience and move forward and look at everybody in the eye and know that there's nothing that we have done to that person that would merit that person being upset or angry at us or offended at us or stumbled. Because many times people say, well, I stumbled because brother so and so or sister so and so did this or that. And so they cause my faith to fail. We don't want to be like those that are guilty of that. And so this morning in our Sunday school, we're going to take a look at what the Bible has to say about uh, bitterness, how to avoid having a bitter spirit, how to do things that will help alleviate that bitter spirit, that we not be consumed by it. So on your sheet there, do you see, does it say the consequences of bitterness on your sheet? What does it say at the top? The consequences of bitterness. And then there is a circle there, an oval, when Jesus said, forgive 70 times 7. He was keenly aware of the mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual consequences of brooding over resentments. Jesus is God in the flesh, and he knows all things, and he was aware that if people do not forgive, there are some consequences in that person's body and that person's mind, right? So what are the physical consequences of not forgiving? There are three things. What is first there at the top under physical consequences? Chemical balance. So there are instances where you can trace things like ulcers, toxic goiters, high blood pressure, just to name a few of the diseases that are brought on by having a bitter spirit. Our resentments call for certain hormones from the pituitary gland, adrenal gland, the thyroid, and other glands. Now, we don't think about this, but if you are angry and upset, your body begins to change chemically. You've heard of the fight or flight syndrome, how you get upset, somebody is threatening you, and right away, your body begins to pump the adrenaline into your system, and you're making a decision right then and there. Am I going to fight this person? Am I going to run away? What am I going to do? Because that's how God designed the body to operate. So we have these chemical changes that occur when we are angry. Our resentments call for these hormones, and excess of these hormones constantly being pumped into your bloodstream can cause diseases in any part of the body. All right, and there is a reference there to a book called None of These Diseases, written way back in 1968, but still a very good book. You can go ahead and read that book. I think there's an updated version as well. But it shows what happens when we allow things that should be settled to just fester in us, how it can then cause physical problems in our own bodies called diseases, illness. Then the facial features, refusing to forgive results in physical fatigue and loss of sleep. We may try to hide our resentments, but soon they will also be etched into our eyes and facial muscles. Get this now, as permanent reflections of our inward feelings. You believe that? Absolutely. Absolutely. Have you ever met somebody who is just angry? They're angry at how life treated them. Uh, Maybe it's a lady who was mistreated by her former husband or boyfriend. Maybe a man who was upset because of how he was treated on his job. And they never got over it. And this is stuff that happened 25, 30 years in the past, but they never quite got over that thing. It begins to affect the way how they look. It begins to etch in their features, right? And it's because they have an angry spirit, and the body is just reflecting what is going on inside of the spirit. So that's another consequence. And then you have the third thing there, bone health. Now, Leviticus 17:11 says the life of the flesh is in the blood. And this is amazing. Just a parenthesis here. God wrote this in the Bible years before modern medicine knew about blood transfusions. As a matter of fact, there was a practice called bloodletting. You all know what bloodletting was? That's when they let somebody bleed to death because they believe, well, your blood is disease. If we let enough of it come out of your body, then the disease will leave you. But they did not understand if you lose too much blood, you're going to die. All right. So had they believed God's word, they would have not done that. All right. So the Bible says the life of the flesh is in the blood. But the factory, so to speak, the factory for the blood is in the bone marrow. You all know that. Your bone marrow. That is where your red blood cells are manufactured. Right? Very important part of the body. You can't see it, but it's there. When you eat a chicken bone, right? How many of you actually like to take the chicken bone and crack the chicken bone in your teeth? And what's that? What's on inside of the chicken bone? No. You have the marrow, right? That's where the blood cells are produced. And the same thing is true of the human body. So now, the health of our bones determines the health of our body. And when we are bitter, bitterness has a direct devastating effect upon bones. And we can do it. As a matter of fact, let's look at some of these verses here this morning. Let me have Brother Gilmore look up Psalm 32 and verse 3. And we have Lou look up Proverbs 15:30. And we have Gerald Dexter read Proverbs 17:22. We'll have Linda Dexter read Proverbs 14 and verse 30. And then I'm going to read Proverbs 12:4. So go ahead and read your verse that was assigned to you, beginning with Cleo Gilmore.
Okay. Psalms 32:3.
Yes.
And it says, this. When I kept silent, my bones grew old. So my groaning all the day long.
Okay, so what do we see here?
You keep silent.
David had committed a sin,
Right.
and he had tried to cover up the sin.
Yeah.
And as he was trying to cover up the sin, his health suffered. His bones began to roar, that is, he began to feel pain in his bones. Right? This was a direct result of his malice, which he had tried to conceal from God. All right, Proverbs 15:30.
16:30,
15:30.
15:30.
Yeah.
The light of the eyes rejoices the heart, and a good report makes the bones fat.
Okay, now this about making the bone fat. Once again, this expression has to do with the health of the bones. And it's saying that when you get good news, all right, good news is good for your health, the health of your bones even. So that's why you should not listen to bad news day after day after day, 24/7. Sometimes you got to turn off the news telecast and read a good book instead, or get an encouraging message, because just negativity all the time. And if you're surrounded by negative people who never have anything good to say, never have anything encouraging to say, that can begin to affect the person.
And may I say something?
Yes, you may.
That's the definition of the good news, John 3:16.
That is correct.
That helps the bone.
That's right.
And if you are stopping right now.
And that's why we should be in church,
That's right.
gospel preaching.
Health wise,
And all the things that the Lord told us to do, there's a reason for it. There's a reason why we are to be in the house of the Lord, worshiping Him, and living clean. All of these things have benefits. So a broken spirit, Proverbs 17:22. That's Gerald. Proverbs 17:22.
A merry heart doeth good like a medicine, but a broken spirit drieth the bone.
Okay, so the merry heart would be your inner man, right? You hear good news, you're encouraged, you have a pleasant fellowship experience, or you enjoy your family, and that's like medicine, all right? That's encouraging. You feel good, things are going well. You have that enthusiasm built up in you. It just makes a big difference. But a broken spirit now is that spirit that has been given nothing but bad news. It has negative after negative after negative. It drieth the bone. It has an adverse effect upon the person's bone health. Remember, it's not just the outward hard shell, there's also the marrow, right? That's also part of the bones.
Can I ask you another question?
Yes, go ahead.
Do people every day in politics and everything else that we see, do people making that connection that you just got to say?
No, they're not. They're not.
Obviously, they're not.
They're not
I mean,
making
look at all this NBC, CBS, the leader of our country, we need to pray for him because he don't realize. I mean, there's a report finally from special prosecutor coming out.
Yeah.
And if it ain't good, I mean, well, it's not good to that person.
Well, we'll let the truth prevail.
Yeah.
But I agree that people in leadership should be aware of this.
Dealing truth.
And especially people who are in spiritual leadership,
Yeah, yeah.
pastors, and also heads of household. You lead your family. Remember, your family needs a person who, generally speaking, has a good, merry heart. He's cheerful, not somebody who always is trying to bring people down, constant criticism, constant reviling, constant putting down. When you always putting people down, that leads to a broken spirit, right? It's like if you kick a dog over and over again, you know, may have been a good watchdog, but you just kept on kicking that dog. That dog sees you, puts his tail between his leg, and he runs away from you. So that's what this is referring to. It's talking about how you can encourage people so that they have good health. All right, you surround yourself with men and women that want to be encouraged. Now, some people you got to work with, 8, 10 hours a day. You can't help that. But when you're not on the job, surround yourself with some encouraging people. Find some good friends. Everybody needs at least 1 or 2 good friends, right, that can support you and encourage you and help you to get through life without too much negativity. Life in itself is negative. I just heard this past week, a gentleman who's been to church here a couple of times, comes to our food distribution, heard he was shot. Kerry,
Yes.
he was shot. Now, did he survive it?
Did he?
Did he survive?
I don't know. I was gonna ask Ken. Ken don't know.
He did not. Oh, so see. You know him? You know Kerry?
He stayed in.
Yeah, he stayed right over here.
I know that. Martindale.
Martindale.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. He's been here a couple of times. He's come for the food. Actually, he is the one who did the flooring in the men's restroom. He did that for us just this year, a couple of months ago. Yeah, he was doing stuff for you over there as well. Well, I just heard from Brother Porter a few days ago that he was shot. I said, he was shot? What happened? He was in the wrong place, at the wrong time, with the wrong people, and somebody shot him. Right? So that's bad news. I don't want to be hearing this stuff, people that I know on a regular basis. So when I go home now to be with my family, I may mention that to my wife, but we can't dwell on these negative things. Day after day after day, it's not good. It's not good. So I'm sorry to hear that he got shot and that he died. That hurts me, right? It hurts me. When you hear bad news, it hurts you. It has an effect upon your body. So a broken spirit dry the bones. Talk about this constant negative communication and constantly giving people things that they really don't need to be experiencing or hearing. And that has an adverse effect upon bone health. All right, the next verse is Proverbs 14:30, Sister Dexter.
A sound heart is the life of the flesh, but envy the rottenness of the bones.
All right, so there we have something that we talked about last Sunday night, which is envy. Envy rottens the bones. Again, remember, it's not just the hard shell, you have a bone marrow. All right, so what goes on inside the bone marrow may be affected by a person's temperament. The things that a person allows to dwell in his or her life. How many times you hear somebody was bitter, was angry, and then in a few years you hear they have some kind of a degenerative disease that has surfaced in their body. Well, these things are not coincidence. These things are related. All right, you related the way how they live and how they look at life. Having resentment and envy, you should never live with envying in your life and constant jealousy and pettiness. That will have a detrimental effect upon your health. Right? Absolutely. So can the spiritual affect the physical? Absolutely. Because of the chemicals which are released from the glands that we all have in the body. So that's how the spiritual affect the physical. You have something you wanted to?
It's the spiritual first anyway.
It is.
The real me is not what you see here.
Mm-hmm.
The real me is my spirit.
It's in you.
Yeah.
All right, let's go Proverbs 12 and verse 4. Proverbs 12:4. A virtuous woman is a crown to her husband. Right? What does that mean? Well, everyone knows what a crown is. A crown is a symbol of honor and authority. In other words, if a man marries a good woman, he has a good wife, she makes him look better than he is. She's his crown. She complements him. She supplements him. She actually is his queen. So your men saying, well, this is my queen. Well, literally, your wife is supposed to be that to you. And she's supposed to make you seem to be this larger than life person that is a really, really blessed individual because of her. All right. So she is a crown. But, and this is the contrast, she that maketh ashamed is as rottenness in his bones. So this is, now folks, don't think this is talking about one argument that you and your wife had. We're not talking about one argument, something that was said. We're talking about a constant situation where she refuses to submit to her husband's leadership, even though the husband is trying to follow God's leadership and live a godly life. But this wife, this woman, refuses to honor him in that. And I've known several cases of men like that in that situation. One guy, he was called to preach, called to the ministry, and his wife did not want any part of it. She did not want to be a preacher's wife, and so she abandoned him. All right, she broke his heart. She left the home, and then to make matters worse, she came back after a few days to tell him, oh, by the way, I forgot my birth control pills, just to kind of rub it in some more that she's going to be out there doing her own thing. So that is rottenness in the bone. That's what we're talking about. Talking about a woman who refuses to honor her husband. One who does, then she is a crown jewel to her husband. So if you're not married and you're looking for a wife, look for somebody who is willing to crown you. If she ain't willing to crown you, you probably don't want to get married. Just saying. Okay, so.
Could that come under the definition of like a faucet, certain drip, 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 drip?
That's another, that's a contentious woman. It's like a dripping faucet. That's another proverb, but it's related. It's related to this. All right, so this has to do with relationships. All right, and if a man marries a woman and he is called to do something for God and she does not want to follow him, she then becomes a hindrance to him. She then becomes unequally yoked. He is unequally yoked to her. Okay, so just keep that in mind, especially when you're giving advice to young people. So now let's go from there. Ezekiel 32:27. Ezekiel 32:27. All right, let me have Brother Claiborne read Ezekiel 32:27.
Ezekiel 32:27 says, and they shall not lie with the mighty that are fallen of the uncircumcised, which are gone down to hell with their weapons of war. And they have laid their swords under their heads, but their iniquities shall be upon their bones, though they were the terror of the mighty in the land of the living.
All right, thank you. But their iniquities shall be upon their bones. So what does that mean? That means that the bone is affected by sin. Right? Bone health. So all of these things come under the heading of physical consequences of living with bitterness. Chemical balance is affected, facial features are affected, bone health is also affected. Okay. Now, we'll go to the spiritual consequences, but before we do this, let's receive the Sunday school offering. Any comments or questions about anything? Okay. All right, let's get into the spiritual consequences. And the first thing that appears there under B, an inability to love God. Why? Because the heart is bitter. An inability to love God is the immediate result of hating another person. Right? That's from 1 John 4, 20 and 21, if a man say, I love God and hateth his brother, he is a what?
Liar.
A liar. For he that loveth not his brother whom he hath seen, how can he say he loves God whom he hath not seen? And this commandment have we from him, that he who loveth God love his brother also. So right away you know when somebody comes to church and they have some issue against another Christian and they're always criticizing another Christian, they always seeking to or undermine somebody else. They don't have the love of God in them, because if they did, they would love their brother. Right? You love your brother as yourself. So that is evidence the person may have a bitter spirit. All right. Let's go to Hebrews chapter 12. Hebrews 12.
You know, some people don't know that.
They
Some
don't know?
people don't know that.
No, that's what I'm teaching.
They're doing it. Next thing you know, they're hurting, they're sick, and
Mhm.
you know.
They don't realize it stems from a bitter spirit
Holistic. Yeah.
that they did not deal with in the past. I think I mentioned this before. I was in a conference at a church, and the keynote speaker was a missionary. He was a missionary from the Virgin Islands in the Caribbean, and he was there back in the 1950s. And in 1958, he and another missionary butted heads over a container of supplies that was shipped from the States. And he said this other guy stole his container. And he was mad at him. But he was speaking, this is a conference now taking place in the 1990s. This thing happened in 1958.
But he never forgave him.
He never forgave this guy after 30 plus years. He was still bitter. And it came out in his preaching. And I looked at my wife, I said, this guy needs to get his heart right. Because even if he was right, he's wrong for being bitter at that guy for all those years. So he's with the Lord now. I think both of them.
70 times 70.
Both of them passed on. They're both with the Lord now, because at that time he was already in his 60s. This was back in the 1990s. So anyway, Hebrews 12, verse number 14. Follow peace with all men and holiness, without which no man shall see the Lord. Looking diligently, lest any man fail of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness springing up trouble you, and thereby many be defiled. So what is this talking about? It's talking about how we are to live. We are to follow peace with all men. I am not supposed to go around this community looking for fights with people, trying to pick fights and issues and contentions. As much as life in me, I'm to live peaceably with all men. Because if I don't, then a root of bitterness springs up. And this is talking about a root, just like a plant root. It is hidden under the ground. You can't see it. It's there and it's spreading, but it's spreading out of sight. And the root of bitterness works just like that. It spreads out of sight until one day it springs up and it begins to defile people around it. Then you find, why is Sister so-and-so so angry and so resentful all of a sudden? It didn't just happen overnight. She's been dealing with something for the last 10 years. And instead of giving it to the Lord and talking to somebody about it and asking how to deal with that issue, she just kept on harboring those feelings towards that person. And then one morning she got up and it came out in her speech, her temperament, the way how she treated her kids, the way she reacted to her friends even. And people said, well, what's wrong with you? Oh, nothing wrong with me. But it's a root of bitterness. It's under the surface and it's spreading. So if you know it's spreading in your life, what should you do? Well, you need to live peaceably with all men. You need to find a way to be at peace. So if you have wronged somebody, you apologize. If somebody has wronged you, You confront them and you tell them what they did that made you mad. It's always better to go directly to the person and say, you made me mad when you took my banana pudding. That was the case. Took my banana pudding, made me mad, or whatever it is that you did to me that caused me to get upset. And I've been dealing with this for the last 10 years now, and it's got to the point now where I can't even talk to you like a friend anymore because you offended. Okay, I'm sorry. Or they said, well, I don't remember that, but at least you told them this is the reason why. Can you all deal with that?
For the
This is how
sake
you deal with it.
of healthiness, just for the sake of healthiness.
Correct. For the sake of your health.
Yeah.
All right. So it results in an inability to love God. The second thing we see there, doubts regarding our relationship with God, commonly accompany bitterness. This is quite natural since most of us have at some time repeated the Lord's Prayer, in which we pray, forgive us our trespasses, as the same way we forgive those who trespass against us. So do we really believe that? Hence, if we refuse to forgive other people, we're actually asking God not to forgive us. Think about that. The significance of this point is emphasized by the Lord Jesus Christ. For if ye forgive men their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if ye forgive not men their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. We had a conference with this theme a couple of years ago up in IBF, Virginia. It was on racial reconciliation and the need to forgive those who have offended you. And we had like 15 preachers that preach on this topic, myself included. And I think it affected all of us. But it's not just in the matter of race, it's in the matter of any relationship with other people and how we interact with people. And we say, well, I want God to forgive me, but I'm not willing to forgive so-and-so. Well, did you sin? Yes. Well, my sin was not as large as her sin. But was it a sin? Yes, it was a sin. All sin is sin. And if you really are honest, God may have forgiven you all kinds of sins that you're not really willing to talk about. So can you forgive this person their trespass? And forgiveness is something that we all wrestle with because we tend to want to feel that we are the only ones that are right and that everybody else is wrong. Well, forgiveness means that you accept the fact that as a human being, you have, not may have, you have offended somebody at some time. You may have offended somebody yesterday. Last
Well,
week.
that not only happen people to people, but nation to nation.
Oh, yes.
Nation against nation. They haven't.
Yes, it happens between large groups of people, nation, cultures, ethnic groups, that sort of thing.
Nation.
And we got to break it down to the individual level.
Yes.
Because this is where we live. I live in this body,
Yeah.
and this is the only body I have, so I have to deal with issues in this life, in this body. So if your friend, your spouse, your father, your sister, your brother, somebody that's close to you, offended you, point out what it is, but be quick to forgive them. Forgive them so that bitterness will not get the best of you and that you not become someone who doubt your relationship with God. I said, well, am I really saved because I don't want to forgive that person? And holding a grudge can be sweet. You hold a grudge, it's like you're nursing a baby, but it's an evil baby. And after a while, that grudge, you get so big that it kills the nursing mother. And that's why it's not good to hold grudges. All right, now, major hindrances to spiritual development of others may result when we refuse to forgive, especially if we claim to be in a right fellowship with God. Our attitudes of bitterness will repel them from whatever it is that we are trying to convince them of. If we are to allow Christ to live in us, we must allow him to forgive through us. Now, you think about the time that you're upset and there was somebody who needed your help, but because you were so upset and bitter, you didn't want to help anybody. You kind of withdraw into a shell. Ever happen to anybody? Kind of withdraw. I'm upset. I wasn't treated right. I don't want to help anybody. That's bitterness. Right? We've got to recognize it and we got to correct it. It happens. Next page, emotional consequences. Depression is one of the most significant consequences of refusing to forgive the people who wrong us. Depression, I said, because it requires emotional energy to maintain a grudge, right? You want to maintain a grudge, you've got to be constantly thinking about what that person did to you to keep that grudge going. Just as we become weary when our physical energy is exhausted, so we become depressed when our emotional energy is exhausted. Now, I was confronted by an individual a while back and said, remember when we played basketball together and you fouled me? He said, you fouled. I said, okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I fouled you. May have been 10, 15 years ago, but I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. We're just playing basketball. All right. But if you hold on to that grudge, you can become so bitter at that person that then you're thinking of ways, how can I get back at him or her? What can I do to that person to make them feel as hurt as they made me feel? You feel what I'm saying? So you got emotional consequences. And it takes energy. It takes energy to maintain a grudge. Bitterness and resentment create an emotional focus toward the person who offended us. The focus is the chief cause of becoming just like the one we resent. You want to underline that. If you keep holding grudges, you become just like the person that you resent. The more we focus on his actions toward us, the more we resemble the basic attitudes which prompted his action. So if the guy was mean-spirited and you hold a grudge, after a while, guess what? You find yourself becoming mean-spirited. Guy was unjust, you hold a grudge, after a while you find that you're becoming unjust. So it affects you emotionally. Mental consequences. A medical doctor illustrates the mental consequences of holding resentments with his description. Here's what he said. He said, the moment I start hating a man, I become his slave. You want to circle that, underline that. The moment I start hating a man, I become his slave. I can't enjoy my work anymore because he controls my thoughts. My resentments produce too many stress hormones in my body. And I become fatigued after only a few hours of work. The work I formerly enjoyed is now drudgery. Even vacations cease to give me pleasure. I can't escape his tyrannical grasp on my mind. This person is a slave. But why is this person a slave? Because they allowed that person who wronged them to get into their mind. So that person now begins to live in your mind and controls you even when he or she is not even around. So it says they can't even enjoy their vacation time. Now that's pretty bad when you can't enjoy vacation because you're thinking about some Yahoo that did you wrong. That's pretty awesome. It says, when the waiter serves me porterhouse steak, it might as well be stale bread and water. My teeth chew the food when I swallow it, but the man I hate will not permit me to enjoy its taste. Now that is being a slave to the person who wronged you. It is for this reason that Solomon wrote, better is a dinner of herbs where love is than a stalled ox and hatred therewith. Right? That's talking about eating with resentment. Resentment, bitterness even affects the way we enjoy our food. Now, that's pretty bad. And then the final thing for this morning, multiplying the consequences of bitterness. Bitterness is all too easily passed on from one generation to another, thus affecting hundreds of descendants. The sins of the parents are visited to the third and fourth generations of those who hold hatred in their heart. Deuteronomy 5. Notice how this relates to discipline in the following illustration. So in the first generation, there is bitterness toward parents for their strict discipline. This prompts leniency and inconsistency in disciplining their children. The second generation is bitterness towards parents for their leniency, feeling they don't care. This prompts strictness and inconsistency in disciplining their children. The third generation is bitter because of the strict discipline. Then they are lenient and inconsistent in their discipline of their children. And it just keeps going in cycles. All right. So bitterness is something that all of us have to keep a guard. We've got to guard against that.
Well, that's the station of the human mankind.
Yes.
That's the condition. That is where most, so everybody is right now. If they ain't got the relationship right with God, that's where they are.
That's where they are. You're absolutely right. Bitter. A lot of bitter people in the world today. And that's why the world is the way it is. And those who do know that they have it are then responsible to do something about it. Because I don't want to have my bone health deteriorate before it's time because of harboring bitterness and resentment against people. I don't want to have any part of my health go down because of bitterness and resentment. And I certainly don't want my mental health to be affected. A lot of these crazy people that are out there shooting people unprovoked is because of some bitterness that's affected their minds, causing them to go off the deep end. All right. One last thing.
Before the sun goes down.
Let not the sun go down upon your wrath.
Yeah.
Yes.
But people don't think. The sun just goes down.
Yeah, the sun just goes down. They don't think that they ought to get things right before they go to bed. And so they go to bed angry. They get up.
Whoever the relationship, their relationship. Right?
All right, we're out of time for Sunday school. So we'll try to pick this up again next week for the anniversary. So there will be Sunday school for the anniversary service. So be in your places. And I want to thank you for moving your clock forward 1 hour and being here on time this morning. Most of us anyway. Let's go to Let's Stand Together and let us be dismissed with a song. 501. Now I belong to Jesus. 500. On the count of 4, 3, 2, 1. Jesus, my Lord, will love me forever. From him no power evil can sever. He gave his life to ransom my soul. Now I belong to him. Now I belong to Jesus. Jesus belongs to me. Not for the years of time alone, but for eternity. The third and last. Joy floods my soul, for Jesus has saved me, freed me from sin that long had enslaved me. His precious blood he gave to redeem. Now I belong to him. Now I belong to Jesus. Jesus belongs to me. Not for the years of time alone, but for eternity. All right, let's take a short break and we'll start in the morning.